Hi guys, welcome to August Cottage Garden. My name is Hannah and I'm so glad that you decided to join me today. We are actually in part 2 of a 3-part series where we're doing an August tour of the cottage garden. The first one we did was all about the front yard and the beds surrounding the house. And now we're going to explore a little bit more the island bed, which is in our backyard facing the lake on a hill. And we have a series of 4 islands to help break up the climb because it's quite a steep hill. If you look where I am right now, this is like some of the stone steps leading up to the cottage. And if I kind of slowly pan around, forgive the yard work noises, you can see that there is a path here that is not super steep. If you kind of follow it around, you'd go down one of our first beds. You can kind of keep walking straight on the bottom between the next bed. You can keep walking straight and it wouldn't be too steep. You can see there's a path straight down that is steeper. And actually, if I keep going around, you could see, if you didn't want to take the stairs, you could keep walking on this nice little grass pathway. And you would get a small section of steep hill. But if I pan to my right and left, you can see the hill just keeps on going up there. And it keeps on going down here. So it is quite a significant hill. When my parents built the property and the gardens and they planned out kind of what they wanted, they knew that they wanted this series of island beds to help break that hill up. So when they were older, they could probably put some benches in, which we haven't done yet, but it's something that's on our priority list. Or they could take their time walking these paths between the beds to kind of meander around, and they wouldn't ever have to do that giant hill all at once if they wanted to get down to the water. They also kept in mind my maternal grandmother, Sheila, who actually has been gone quite some time, but she loved the water. She was wheelchair bound the last few years of their life. And so my dad was frequently the one that had to push her up and down hills when she wanted to see the water and be up close to it. And he knew that if he ever had someone else in a wheelchair, he wanted a longer path that would make this a little bit easier. So they were kind of planning ahead because they live here now, they're retired, and it's going to be it's going to be their last house. So they wanted to keep the walk something manageable that they could do in older age. So let's kind of dive into some of the things we've learned now that this garden is 12 years old. The first thing we learned is actually we didn't make these beds big enough. So when my dad was planning out the shapes, we kind of wanted really nice wide walkways, which you can see. But part of the problem we ran into is there's areas that are actually very difficult to mow. So this curve in particular is tricky to get a riding lawnmower around, especially with the curve, the height of that little thing right there. You can also see that the plants love it here. So this magnolia is actually larger than it's supposed to be. And you can see that it's been carved out because of where the path is, in part because of deer, and in part because of just the restraint from the fencing. So this is actually one of the next areas that you'll probably see this fall, because we are going to come in and redefine it a little bit. So instead of going in right there, it'll probably go out from about here and follow the contour of this bed a little bit more to kind of make that whole thing bed. We're going to try and see what we can do to even out some of the contour, maybe with some rocks, break it up, but really make it bigger to give Anne some breathing room and mean we don't have to cut this grass. The other thing we learned is some of these really pretty architectural dips are not easy to cut either, or some of these rounded corners, again, not easy to cut the grass. We're actually going to redefine all of the island beds over time. Some will hopefully be done this fall and some will be done this spring. But I thought I'd kind of walk you around, show you what's in the beds right now. No, there's a lot of weeds because we knew this was a project we were going to do. So we didn't weed these or mulch these as much because we figured we would do it all at once. So you're going to see a lot of weeds, but I thought I'd show you some of the things that we are going to keep and some of the things that sadly have outgrown this space and are going to need to find new homes, or they've lived their life as well. Let's look at the first bed. This bed, as I've already identified, we're going to get rid of this little dip here so it's more it doesn't go in, because that's kind of an annoying thing. We also have 3 bridal veil spireas in here, which we're planning on keeping. They love life. They'll get more of their like vase, like vale look. They've only been in probably about 5 or 6 years, and they're doing some of the flapping, which is kind of nice. Those are going to stay. We're going to work on adding some ground cover in here. Also in this bed are some really pretty hydrangeas that unfortunately suffered from a lot of winter damage, but we still managed to get some blooms. This bed, as I said earlier, has a pretty steep little hill right here that we're going to see what we can do to kind of even this out, because it's quite a significant little incline. Walk around it. So we're going to see if there's something we can do to smooth it out a little bit more, so it's a little easier to manage on the lawnmower. We also had a whole bunch of purple coneflowers in here, and you can see there's like one right here, one right here. The rest disappeared, to be honest. There's some little bits of green that I think are seedlings, but other than that, they're gone. We did have a deer get in here, and even though purple coneflowers are not something that they're supposed to eat, it came through and ate a lot of them. It also trampled on them, and again, it was a very hard winter, so we're going to root out all of the weeds, which you can see that there were a lot of weeds, and probably start again with some more purple coneflower in this area. We also used to have a lot of creeping geranium in here and iris in here that, again, deer came through and just destroyed. Here's what's left of the iris. That's it. That's what's left. So we're going to see if we can lift these rhizomes. We might start with new. You can see grass we just kind of let take over. We're going to get rid of some of these nasty weeds sooner rather than later. And you can kind of see, I think that's either a weed or the creeping geranium. We might leave those so we can see if it's trying to make a comeback. But we've also had a rock or two here and there that needs to be reset, which we'll do. We've got some grasses, and then over here we actually have a hibiscus that is looking pretty pathetic, if you ask me. It's right there. It's hard to tell amongst all the other weeds, but it really did not do much this year. Maybe it's because we haven't had a lot of heat, except for that 1 week when everything fried because it changed so suddenly. But I think this is something that we might rethink a little bit as well. You can see from the other side, the winter damage is much more obvious here. We should have probably cut it out, but never got around to it. We do have, though, some really pretty red hot pokers here, which are done for the season, but that's what that texture is. My dad and I probably have different ideas of what could be done in this area, but we are going to add some purple coneflowers back, probably add some more hibiscus. I'd love to see large swaths, but also kind of throughout the whole bed. I'd like to move this grass to somewhere else, though grasses are very difficult to move, so I don't know how well that'll go down, but it's a nice chance for us to lay it out again anew, and then also work some smaller plants in as well. We don't have any plans to change this contour. We're pretty happy with it, though we do plan to replace the deer fence in a lot of these areas. So this is, as we look at the cottage, the top left bed. Let's go look at the top right bed. There's, again, just a giant ton of weeds, and you might be able to see right here that there's some Japanese beetles and some very limited roses. Earlier this year, I attempted to do a rejuvenation prune on 3 rugosa roses. You can see that some of it did come back, but they're not looking great, and we're gonna have to unearth them and see if it's something that we want to keep. We did know when we were doing it that these were planted too closely, is something we learned. So it's even if they are coming back, we might choose to take like this middle one out. Other things that were planted a little too closely are these Miss Kim lilacs, which also were really damaged this winter, and we pulled off the fencing because they were getting some very odd shapes from where deer could eat them, and we think we might do like a rejuvenation prune, take them back to the ground and start over. This bed is one we're going to widen here. We're also going to do something new on this end. We haven't fully figured out the exact shape, but it's hard to cut around, and there's some areas over there in particular that are hard to grow grass. So we're thinking we will incorporate them into this bed a little bit more. A lot of the things here have died out, except we do have this really pretty seed-headed grass, which is a really nice size. It's really pretty in the wind, which will stay, might move, but it's a really fun thing. Down here, we have another bed that's changing shape quite significantly. I'm actually gonna hop it down to kind of show it to you more. But as we go around, you can see we have this giant bamboo. That bamboo actually has moved to 2 or 3 houses with us. We did not put bamboo garden when we put it in here, which we regret. It's probably gonna destroy that wall, but at this point, its roots are like solid, impossible to get through even with a chainsaw. So we might try to add some after the fact around it so it doesn't get bigger than that. But getting it out right now would be quite difficult. This is another bed that the contour is going to change shape pretty dramatically, to be honest. This is actually a temporary holding area. We've got lots of plants and pots in, but we're going to take this, it'll be pulled out right there, and we're thinking about adding a shade flowering tree like a dogwood or something in here as well, with a seat that could be easily accessed and enjoyed down here, because it's right next to a really big grass area that is fun to play in. In here, most of these things are actually in pots. We have a number of hydrangeas, we have a couple lilacs, we have a couple buddleias, and then we've got some pretty awesome thistle plants and other weeds that have kind of popped up here and there. There's also a wigelia, a variegated grass, a boxwood. There's just a lot packed in here that actually overwintered in here that we bought last year for some of the projects I've already mentioned that we didn't quite get to. We're hoping to next year. Other things in here is this plant. It's actually sick right now, but this is like a bush form of sumac that, again, we regret planting, and we're going to try and take out and eradicate. You can see on that side the bed is very thin. We're hoping to expand it out a little bit more and do some low growing, shade loving things. That is actually 3 out of the 4 island beds. We do have 1 left to talk about, which I'll add. But before we go in, I wanted to talk about some of the plans we have for the beds around the boathouse, as well as some plans we have to eventually add a vegetable garden down here as well. So this is one side of the boathouse, and these beds have been pretty neglected for a number of years. We do have ornamental crab apple here that we transplanted from the front of the house when we realized it was getting way too little sun. It gets a little more here. It actually gets a lot of sun, and it just happens to be one of the only periods of shade we get. We also have some grasses here that some have done well, some of them haven't. We're going to transplant some of the ferns in here to hopefully kind of fill this whole space. We've got this beautiful boxwood that loves it here. It does get eaten, so we do have to kind of fence it back. It's a little wasted, so we think we might move it, but we're also thinking of pulling this bed out just a little and mulching under it, because it's where like our paddle boards and kayaks and stuff are. But you can see some of the fern. There's already some ferns here and some other grasses that don't really grow quite as tall. So we're thinking about taking the grasses out, moving them down where they get more sun, and then we're gonna pull this bed out and kind of incorporate it with this new seawall as well. This is probably a next year project at best. It might be 2 or 3 years down the line. But it does put us right next to this bed, which is kind of fun to look at. This is one of our foxglove beds. We also planted some zinnias and some snapdragons in here. You can see that they actually took. There's also some weeds, but they're pretty weeds at least. Thought I'd just kind of walk around and show you what's here. It's pretty. These are Albaneri's giant. Well, they're supposed to be Albaneri's giant zinnias. It's just kind of fun to see what's here. This site is the site of the future vegetable garden. That again might be a next year or the year after project. It's something that my parents really wish they had more space to do, and they want some raised beds that they can help, that are a little higher. It makes it easier for them to vegetable garden in. You might remember that we actually do have container gardens up on the deck, which we'll go in our next video. We'll provide an update for what they look like now, where we have some cherry tomatoes and some other smaller vegetable items. That has worked okay for the last couple years, but I have a larger space in the city, which we've documented well, and they really want something kind of like that here. Especially for some of the varieties of tomatoes they like to grow. They need them in a better soil reservoir than a smaller pot. We've tried like a Paul Robeson, for instance. We didn't even attempt to grow this year, which is our favorite variety of tomato, which is an heirloom variety. But it just does not do well in a pot, even when you're fertilizing it regularly. So that's something they want. They want to be able to do like zucchinis, maybe a couple squash plants, a larger quantity of beans that they can help preserve and see them through the winter. We also have those fruit trees that'll go in this enclosed area, and they are going to set up a couple berry beds for blackberries and raspberries. So having some food production right here that they can help preserve and store and enjoy just the growing of. So that's a project. I'm hoping it'll be this fall. I think it might be next spring at best, and maybe even a little later, because we've got a lot that I've already outlined, and it just kind of depends on what my dad feels like doing first. And I should also add, we haven't done a lot this summer because we've actually been doing a lot of stuff inside. So all that to say, this is the future site of the vegetable garden, but here's a backed up view of all the beds. Now we've visited the top left, the top right, and this is the one we went to most recently. This is one that's actually the last one, the bottom left, is not going to be changing all that much other than some reclamation that obviously needs to happen. It is a good size. I don't think we're expanding anything. We're just going to change a little bit of what's planted in there and make it a little bit easier to get in and out and maintenance. This tree is actually a grafted lilac tree. I mentioned that all of us have trees when we started college. This happens to be mine. It's probably about 15 years old. So it's lived most of its life here. They moved it when it was 3 or 4 years in our previous garden because we sold that house. And it had some pruning done to it by my father, so you can kind of see some of the interesting branching. But it's a really pretty tree. It won't get too much taller than that. In this area, they're kind of hard to see. But we do have some berry bushes that we need to reclaim. We need to figure out some better watering because they're really just not happy. It's the long and short of it. We do have some daisies in here that again could probably use some reclamation help. But we have 6 blueberries. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They're looking kind of sad. They, I don't know if they're getting quite the water they like. They also really like acidic soil. They're also getting a lot of sun. You can kind of see from this rhubarb that things are a little crispy. We actually had a second rhubarb right here that I think is like gone. So maybe this is getting a tiny bit too much sun for them. Hard to tell. We also need to obviously get the weeds under control. But that's what this is. We've got a beautiful boxwood. I can never remember what that bush is called. But then we have some grasses, iris, aspirea, in addition to this giant river birch, which is actually maxing out on its height too. So let me kind of walk you around and show you this top. We used to have black-eyed Susans in here, and then they died from blight. But the birds they've either come back or the birds have planted some. I also did plant in here some seedlings. Let's see what survived. That's a hollyhock that I planted. And then here's a hollyhock that I planted. I also planted 2 delphiniums, one of which is still there. It's kind of hard to see, and I don't really feel like taking this apart to get in there. But we do want to pull probably a lot of those daisies out. We don't know if we want this whole thing to be daisies. Other things that I did add here this year, there's 6 dahlias in this space. I think I remember planting like 1 more. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. I don't think it did. But there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we have 3 peonies. I planted a mess of cosmos, which haven't really done anything, which actually tells me this might not be getting enough water because they're definitely getting enough sun. It's kind of a space that we really just need to figure out what we want it to be, what we want it to do. We know we want to keep the veg in there because it's going to be really close to the other vegetable garden, but we kind of let it go. Even the peonies, we're not sure we want them to stay there. Maybe we'll put something bigger in there. I would love to see some like summerific hibiscus, like some of the midnight varieties with darker leaves, maybe mixed with some spirea. We're gonna redefine this area a little bit more because we've let it kind of do what it wants for a while. I put some cosmos and dahlias in. We probably won't do that long term. Though I'll probably pop dahlias in wherever there's space as long as I have tubers for a while. But it does need to be defined. It does need to have some more deliberate design, especially now that like the black-eyed Susans had died, the daisies kind of fizzled out. It's an opportunity for us to sit back and say, okay, what do we want to put here? How do we want to make this a border that lives and is beautiful throughout the summer with always something of interest growing that'll complement and attract pollinators, especially when we have these berry bushes. I do think we need to figure out water in all these because some of them aren't getting properly watered, I would guess, based on some of the growth I'm seeing. And we also need to weigh, as we're planting these things, how high maintenance they are. I'm here on the weekends and not every weekend at that. And my parents, they're very active still, but they are getting older. So anything we plant needs to be a lower maintenance item unless it's something that they want to invest in the time and the maintenance in. So this year has really gotten away from us, as you can see in a lot of these beds. Part of it was deliberate, where we said, you know what, we're going to do all these big redefining projects this winter. When you're itching to get outside and you're thinking about all the projects, we had kind of decided some of the shapes and what beds we were going to do and what we wanted to change up what's in them a little bit. And then spring hit and we started doing this and we started doing that, and I got busy at my house and they had some inside projects that were a little unexpected and taking up more time and effort than they realized, and all of a sudden it's August. So we already have acknowledged that a lot of these aren't going to be handled this year. We know that we're going to start first with the bed right by the stairs and redefine that. And then I'm hoping the vegetable garden is next. So there might be at least the fence getting put in this year as we figure out the beds a little bit more, because we've even changed our mind as we have more time to think about it, about what the configuration looks like, and how big we want it, or small, as the case may be. But these are projects that are going to live and breathe for a couple of years, is the point of this. There's a lot that I showed, a lot that we have dreams of, and we might change our minds, which we already have a little bit, about what we do and don't want to do. Either way, I'm glad that you guys, we can kind of show you what things are looking like now that it is mid-August. I think the last time we checked in, it was like June-ish. So it's a different season. Even though it's still summer, it's a different part of summer for you guys to see what's there. And we can share a little bit more about the plans we have for these spaces that we're definitely going to document on this YouTube channel. So like this video and subscribe. If you have any questions that I can answer, please enter them below. But this is a part 2 of a 3-part series. The last part is actually going to be right up on the deck, where I give an update to the container garden that we planted earlier this year with the vegetables that I mentioned, and what's worked and what's proved a little bit challenging and what may be beyond our control a tiny bit. So anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next video. Bye-bye.